news of the appearance of the fleet of the Majus, of the Norsemen, may God curse them, from the Mediterranean off the west coast of Al-Andalus in the time of the Amir Abd il-Rahman ibn al-Hakam, and their attack on his people and the great harm they did to his cities and to the Muslims, and how the Amir came to their aid and brought reparation, and what happened during the attack insofar as we have been able to learn, for full knowledge belongs only to God, whose ways are glorious. Ahmad ibn Muhammad al-Razi said, "At the end of the year 229-844, the ships of the Norsemen, who were known in Al-Andalus as Majus, appeared off the western coast of Al-Andalus, landing at Lisbon, their first point of entry to the Forbidden Lands. It was a Wednesday, the first day of Dhu al-Hijjah in that year, and they remained there 13 days, during which time they engaged in 3 battles with the Muslims. Next they went on to Cadiz, and after that to Medina Sidonia. There a battle took place with the Muslims, at which Lab ibn Musa was present, having received the safe conduct from the Amir Abd al-Rahman. He had received a letter from Wab Allah ibn Hazm, the governor of Lisbon, telling him that along the stretch of coast 54 ships of the Majus had appeared, with 54 smaller craft and their crews, and that the Amir had immediately sent out letters to the governors of the coastal regions, so that they might be warned to be on their guard. On Wednesday, after the 14th night of the month of Muharram in the year 230-844, the ships of the Norsemen halted at Seville, which was undefended. That day they plundered all they could, taking advantage of the negligence of its inhabitants. As soon as the news reached the Amir, Abd al-Rahman immediately sent his cavalry to the river, led by Abd Allah ibn Kulayb, Muhammad ibn Sa'id ibn Rustum, and Abd il-Wahid bin Yazid al-Iskandarani. They occupied the Al-Harif and camped there. Later they were reinforced by Abd Allah ibn al-Mundir with a party of men who had joined them. They sent letters to the governors, telling them to proclaim a general call to arms to the Muslims to fight off these unexpected tyrants, whose unprovoked attack on a defenseless region was without precedent. People gathered from all sides and rallied at Córdoba. At their head was the eunuch Abu al-Fath Nazir, the favorite of the Amir Abd al-Rahman, who hastened out with a great multitude and a very great show of force. Meanwhile, the Norsemen, may God curse them, had arrived, ship after ship, and occupied the city of Seville. They spent 7 days there, killing the men and enslaving the women and children, until the commanders arrived and clashed with them again and again, causing more and more casualties, until the death toll began to have an effect on them and it became clear that they had been defeated. The greatest battle against them took place on a Wednesday, when there were 5 nights left of the month of Safar in the year 230-844 in the village of Tejada near Seville. God destroyed many of them, and they died there, and 30 of their ships were burned, and many of their dead were hung from posts, and others from the trunks of the palm trees of Seville. From the day that they entered Seville and overcame its inhabitants to the day of their defeat and the final departure of the survivors was 40 days. God caused their leader to die and reduced their numbers, and news of their victory was sent to the provinces, not only in Al-Andalus, but also to the Berber amirs of the North African coast. To Afla ibn Abd al-Wahhab, the lord of Tahert and client of the Umayyads, and to others. They were sent the heads of the leader and his 200 paladins. God calmed the agitation of Al-Andalus, which had shuddered at such audacity against its people and the defiance of its power, and dispelled its fear. Isa ibn Ahmad al-Razi, remarking on this news, said, "The fleet of the Norsemen, may God destroy them, coming from the western sea which is adjacent to them, seized Seville at the beginning of the year 230, 844. The first point at which they disembarked was the island of Kaptil, some way up the river, a place dedicated to horse breeding. They disembarked on the Sunday, 12 nights after the beginning of Muharram, in the year 230, 844, and their ships were 80 in number. On the second day after their arrival, 4 ships were sent off to Correa del Rio, which stands on the banks of the river to the west of the city, inhabited by Yemeni Arabs from Yasub, known as the Bani Mahdi, 4 miles from the place where they disembarked at Kaptil. They immediately sacked the village and killed everyone they encountered there in a great attack, the first that they carried out against the Muslims. This village has continued to be a ribat, and during the reign of the Caliph Abd al-Rahman III, a congregational mosque was built there, because formerly it did not have a place for prayers. Then, on Wednesday, the 3rd day after their arrival, the Norsemen, may God curse them, left the village of Kaptil and set out in the direction of the city of Seville. When they reached the church of the water, Kamisat al-Ma, 2 farsakhs from the city, and they were already close, the Muslims of the city and others who joined them decided to fight off the infidels. They sallied out against them, filled with great courage and determination, but without discipline. They had no designated leader, not even a standard bearer, because the governor had deserted and fled to the city of Carmona, leaving them with no support on which they could rely. When the Norsemen approached the town from the river, the weakness of the people and their diminishing numbers were clear to them, so they set out in their ships after them, shooting flight after flight of arrows against them, so that they scattered. Then they disembarked and fought them on the riverbank, most vigorously and with relentless pressure, so that the civilians were put to flight, and none of them stood their ground. Most of them fled back to the city, each going his own way, trying to escape, for the Norsemen burst upon them, attacking any who remained, people who were weak or stubborn, and the wives and children of those who fled, killing, seizing, and enslaving. They remained in the city 7 days, looting and showing no respect for what is sacred. Then, when 8 nights of the month of Muharram remained, they set out, laden with their booty, and loaded it on their ships. They returned to their original encampment on the island of Kaptil, where they remained for several days. They allowed the ransom of prisoners and children, but at the same time they were enraged against the inhabitants of the city who had fled. So they returned to the attack, determined to exterminate them. The people, however, were prudent and did not return, nor appear at all. When the Norsemen got to the city, they found not a soul there, except for a small number of fugitives who tried to defend themselves in a mosque. They were surrounded, and all were killed, for which reason it became known thenceforth as the Mosque of the Martyrs. News soon reached the Amir Abd al-Rahman. He was very angry and sent letters to the districts and frontiers, telling them to mobilize their people and hasten to come from all parts. The first measures were taken by Muhammad ibn Sa'id ibn Rustam, who set out for Seville with a troop of horsemen, who quickly reached the district where the Norsemen were established and began to set traps for them. They set up an ambush at a place called Tablada, 2 miles south of Seville, next to the river. Ibn Rustum sent some of his swiftest men, chosen from among the frontier guards, and others to head to the city and provoke skirmishes with the Norsemen, who were occupying it. This was on a Friday, when 9 nights remained of the month of Safar in the year 230, 844. The Norsemen, seeing that the attackers were few in number, hurled themselves against them. They moved their ships down the river in parallel and disembarked in great numbers to fight and pursue them until they reached the village of Tejada, where the commander Muhammad ibn Sa'id ibn Rustum and the bulk of his troops lay in ambush. When the Norsemen had gone past them, the Muslims sallied out against them. The Muslims who were fleeing suddenly turned back against their pursuers, who gave up the chase, dismayed at what had happened. They suffered a terrible defeat, in which God awarded their heads to the Muslims. More than 1,000 barbarians were killed and 400 captured. Only those who hastened to the ships, fleeing and terrified, escaped. They embarked and defended themselves from on board, abandoning 30 ships, left undefended by their crews who were either dead or captive. Ibn Rustum halted before them, ordering that the captives should be beheaded in front of their companions, which increased their terror. Meanwhile, the Muslims took possession of their empty ships and burned them all. The enemies of God, shamefully defeated, withdrew. Thanks to God.